The postman knew which envelopes carried lies. He could tell by the weight, those thin, careful pages that said, "I'm fine," when the sender's hand had probably shaken writing it. By 1944, old Mr. Henderson had delivered enough telegrams to Gold Star mothers that he'd learned to read between the lines of the letters that came before them. My grandfather was one of those careful liars. I found his letters in my grandmother's attic, 50 years after he'd come home from Okinawa. They were tied with a faded blue ribbon, 43 of them, and as I read through them that humid afternoon, I realized I was holding a masterclass in omission. "The weather here is something else," he'd written in June of 1945, near the end of the Okinawa campaign. What he didn't write was that the rain fell so hard on that island, the mud turned red with more than clay, that the weather he meant was the kind that came with artillery fire, the kind that thundered without lightning. But I also found something else in that attic. Tucked inside his old sea bag was a different letter, one he'd written but never sent. The paper was water-stained, the ink had run in places, but the words were clear enough. This letter told the truth. For 3 years now, I've been collecting these stories. Real letters from real soldiers, from the Civil War clear through to Afghanistan. And when I could find them, the letters they wrote but never sent, the journals they kept hidden, the truth they carried home in silence. What emerged was a portrait of love expressed through lies, of protection offered through omission, of young people trying desperately not to break the hearts of those who loved them most. Let me take you back to October 1917, to a farmhouse outside Topeka, Kansas. Sarah Brenneman was 22 years old when her husband Thomas prepared to ship out with the 89th Division. They'd been married 9 months. She was expecting their first child. The letters Thomas sent her through the fall of 1917 and into 1918, first from training and then from France, were full of hope. He told her about the French countryside, how beautiful it was even in autumn. He told her the food wasn't half bad once you got used to it. He made jokes about his sergeant, a man from Brooklyn who couldn't understand Thomas's Kansas drawl. He asked about her health, whether she was eating enough, what names she'd been thinking about for the baby. "The fellows here are in good spirits," he wrote in November. "We're well trained and ready for whatever comes. Don't you worry about me for even a minute. I'll be home before you know it, holding our little one." Sarah kept those letters in her apron pocket. She reread them while she did the washing, while she cooked supper for 1 instead of 2, while she lay awake at night in their empty bed. They were her comfort, her proof that somewhere across an ocean, her husband was fine, safe, thinking of her. Thomas Brenneman died in late March 1918 during the German spring offensive near the Somme. But that's not the end of this story. 69 years later, Thomas's grandson was going through boxes of family documents when he found a small notebook inside an old tobacco tin, no bigger than a deck of cards. It was his grandfather's actual diary from the war. The entries were brief, sometimes just a few sentences, written in pencil that had faded to gray. November 3rd, 1917. Saw my first dead man today. One of ours. They say you get used to it. Can't imagine how. November 18th. Rats everywhere. Big as cats. They're feeding on the bodies in no man's land. Johnson shot one that got in his pack. Nobody slept after that. December 2nd. Wrote Sarah today. Told her about a village nearby, about church bells ringing. Didn't tell her the church is nothing but rubble now. Didn't tell her about the smell. You can't wash it off. It gets in everything. How do you tell your wife? You might forget what clean air smells like. This became the pattern I found again and again. Letters home full of carefully constructed normalcy, and hidden away somewhere in journals, in unsent letters, in the margins of books. The truth. Private First Class James Chin wrote to his mother in San Francisco every single week from Vietnam. His letters, which his sister later shared with me, painted war as mostly boring. Long stretches of waiting around, card games, bad coffee, mosquitoes the size of hummingbirds. "It's hot, and I miss your cooking," he wrote in July of 1969. "The guys here are good people. We look out for each other. Tell Dad I'm staying safe, staying smart, just like he taught me." But James kept a separate record, a series of letters addressed to his younger brother Daniel, letters he planned to give him when Daniel was older, when he could understand. He never sent them. He never got the chance to deliver them in person either. "Danny," one began, "I'm writing this because I need to tell someone the truth, and I can't tell Mom. Last week we walked into a village that was supposed to be secure. It wasn't. Martinez died 20 feet from me. He was 19 years old. He had a baby daughter back home he'd never even seen. I can't tell Mom that I see his face every time I close my eyes. I can't tell her that sometimes I'm so scared I can barely hold my rifle steady. She needs to believe I'm okay. You'll understand someday why I have to lie to her. It's the only gift I can give her from here." James Chin came home in 1970. He didn't talk much about the war after that. He kept those unsent letters to his brother in a lockbox for 33 years. His brother Daniel was 61 years old when he finally read them, 6 months after James passed away from cancer. The Korean War gave us some of the most heartbreaking examples of this divided truth. That winter of 1950 was absolutely brutal. The Chosin Reservoir campaign pushed American forces to their breaking point in temperatures that dropped to 25 below zero. Men lost fingers and toes to frostbite. They ran out of ammunition. They were surrounded and outnumbered. Corporal William Hayes rode home to his wife Margaret in mid-December. "Cold here, but nothing this Chicago boy can't handle. Got your package yesterday with the socks and those oatmeal cookies. Shared them with the squad. You should have seen their faces light up. We're doing our job, and we're doing it well. I love you so much. Kiss little Billy for me. Tell him Daddy will be home before his 3rd birthday." The letter his sergeant found in Hayes's pack after he was killed told a different story entirely. It was addressed to Margaret, but marked clearly, "Only send this if I don't make it home. Mary," it began, and you could tell by that nickname that this was the real William talking, not the soldier. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone and I am so sorry. I'm sorry for all the lies in my other letters. The truth is, it's hell here. Just the cold alone is trying to kill us. We're cut off, surrounded, and I honestly don't know if we're getting out of this. I'm scared, Mary. I'm more scared than I've ever been in my life. But I couldn't tell you that in my regular letters because then you'd be scared too, sitting at home with our boy. And what good would that do either of you? I needed you to be able to sleep at night. I needed you to smile at Billy. I needed you to have hope, even when I didn't have any left myself. That's what those cheerful letters were for. They were my way of keeping you safe from this place, even though I couldn't keep myself safe. I love you more than anything. I'm sorry I won't be there to see Billy grow up. Tell him his daddy was brave. That part isn't a lie. We're all brave here, even when we're absolutely terrified. This pattern wasn't unique to American soldiers. I've read letters from British troops in the trenches of World War I, from German soldiers on the Eastern Front, from Japanese soldiers in the Pacific. The language changes, the details shift, but that fundamental bargain stays the same. I will lie to you because I love you. During World War II, military censors would cut whole sections out of soldiers' letters with razors. Anything that might reveal troop positions, casualties, morale, strategy. The soldiers knew this was coming, so they learned to censor themselves before the official censors ever saw their words. They became absolute experts at saying nothing while appearing to say everything. "Can't tell you where I am," one soldier wrote, "but the sunset tonight reminded me of that evening we spent at Silver Lake." His girlfriend understood. Silver Lake was where they'd had their first date. She'd worn a silver dress that night. He was in Italy. He was trying to tell her something real within the strict constraints of what he was allowed to say. Lieutenant Robert Morrison's letters to his father read like travel brochures. He described the architecture of North African cities in great detail, the impossible blue of the Mediterranean Sea, the interesting local people he'd encountered. His father, who had fought in the First World War, understood perfectly well what wasn't being said. He kept every single letter, but never reread them. "I couldn't bear to," he told his daughter many years later. "I knew what he was really telling me underneath all those cheerful descriptions. He was saying, 'Dad, I'm in hell, but I'm trying my best not to drag you down here with me.'" The really remarkable letters are the ones where you can actually see the soldier struggling in real time with what to include, what to leave out. You can watch them making these terrible calculations about how much truth the people back home can handle. Sergeant Michael O'Brien, writing from Afghanistan in 2011, started a letter to his wife like this. "Today was..." and then he crossed it out. Started again with "had an interesting day," and crossed that out too. Finally settled on "another day in paradise," with a little smiley face drawn next to it. He told her about a care package that had arrived, about a movie some of the guys watched on somebody's laptop, about how he'd been promoted to squad leader and would be getting a bit more in his paycheck. Told her to spend it on something nice for herself. He didn't tell her that today had involved an IED that killed the soldier walking just 10 feet ahead of him in patrol formation. He didn't tell her that interesting was their dark joke for any day they came back to base with all their limbs attached. He didn't tell her that paradise was sarcasm, so bitter he could taste it in his mouth as he wrote the word. But he did tell his journal. He told it absolutely everything. And maybe 20 or 30 years from now, his kids will read that journal and finally understand why their father couldn't handle fireworks on the 4th of July, why he avoided crowded restaurants, why he sometimes woke up in the middle of the night breathing hard. Maybe they'll understand that he protected their mother from the full truth because he loved her, and that keeping that truth locked up inside himself was its own kind of terrible wound that never quite healed. The letters from the Civil War are the oldest ones in my collection, and they might be the most devastating of all. These soldiers were writing home to farms and small towns where their families had absolutely no frame of reference for what modern warfare really meant. How do you explain to your mother, who has never left rural Kentucky, what 3 days at Gettysburg was actually like? How do you describe the sheer scale of death, the way bodies stacked up like cordwood? Private Henry Walker of the 20th Maine Infantry tried. His letter home from July 1863 started like all the others. "Dear Mother, I hope this letter finds you and the girls in good health. We had quite a time of it up here in Pennsylvania last week." Quite a time. That's the phrase he chose to describe 3 days of the bloodiest fighting in American history up to that point. He told her the Pennsylvania countryside was real pretty, told her he'd met interesting fellows from all sorts of different states. He asked about how the corn was coming in, asked if his sisters were minding her, told her not to work too hard in the summer heat, and then, about 2 paragraphs in, you can see him just break. The careful construction falls apart. "Mother, I can't keep lying to you like this. I have to tell someone the truth, and it can't be the boys here because they all lived through the same thing. We fought on a hill for 3 straight days. 3 days, Mother. There were so many dead, you couldn't walk 10 feet without stepping on somebody. Boys younger than me, calling out for their mothers as they died. Some of them looked like they were sleeping except for all the blood. The smell of it, Mother. Gunpowder and blood. And worse things. I'll never forget that smell as long as I live. I killed men up there. I looked them right in their faces, and I killed them. because if I didn't, they were going to kill me first. How do I live with that? How do I come home to the farm and milk the cows and sit at Sunday dinner and pretend I'm the same Henry who left? I'm not that boy anymore. I don't know who I am now. He wrote 3 more pages like that, just a complete flood of truth pouring out of him. Then he folded that letter carefully and set it aside. He took out a fresh piece of paper and started over. Dear Mother, I hope this letter finds you and the girls in good health. We are doing just fine up here in Pennsylvania. The food could be better, but we're managing. His mother never saw that first letter, the true one. Henry kept it in his pack for the rest of the war, carried it home with him to Kentucky, and hid it in the back of his desk drawer. It stayed there for 140 years until an antiques dealer bought that desk at an estate sale and found it in 2003. The women knew, of course. The mothers and wives and sweethearts. They weren't fools. They understood what wasn't being said. They learned to read between the lines, to hear the silences, to notice what topics were carefully avoided week after week. They became experts at excavating meaning from omission. Eleanor Price received 73 letters from her son Robert during World War II. She saved every single one, bundled them by month, tied them with kitchen string. After the war, after Robert came home with what they called battle fatigue back then, what we call PTSD now, Eleanor took out all those letters and read them again, this time knowing what she was really looking for. She made notes in the margins in pencil. Next to, "We're keeping busy here," she wrote, "the Battle of the Bulge." Next to, "Sure is cold this winter," she wrote, "He almost froze to death." Next to, "Missing your pot roast something fierce," she wrote, "This was when he stopped eating for 2 weeks." She was translating his letters backward into the truth, creating her own decoder ring for her son's war. When I interviewed Eleanor in 2001, she was 94 years old, still sharp as a tack. She told me, "I knew what he was doing. Every mother knew. They were trying to protect us, and we were trying to let them think it was working. It was like this dance we all did. They'd write these cheerful lies, and we'd write back saying how relieved we were to hear everything was fine. And both sides knew the truth, but neither side would say it out loud. Because what else could we do? If they'd told us the real truth, we'd have lost our minds with worry. And if we'd told them we knew they were lying, they'd have felt even worse, like they were failing at the one thing they could still do for us, which was spare us the worst of it." She showed me one letter in particular. Robert had written it in March of 1945, just a few weeks before the war in Europe ended. It was typical of his letters, surface cheerful, nothing alarming. But Eleanor pointed to one sentence. "Been thinking a lot about that fishing trip we took to Lake Michigan when I was 12. He never went fishing at Lake Michigan," Eleanor told me. "We lived in Ohio. We went to Lake Erie. When I read that, I knew something was very wrong. I knew he was trying to tell me he was confused or hurt or scared something, but he couldn't say it directly because of the censors and because he didn't want to worry me. So he gave me this little clue, this thing that was wrong, hoping maybe I'd understand. And I did understand. I just couldn't do anything about it except pray." Robert had been in a field hospital when he wrote that letter. Shrapnel wounds, concussion, fever. He didn't mention any of it directly. The Vietnam War brought a new dimension to these letters because for the first time, soldiers could occasionally call home. But those phone calls, when they happened, were somehow even more carefully edited than the letters. There was something about hearing your mother's actual voice that made lying to her face, so to speak, even harder and somehow more necessary. Specialist Tony Rodriguez managed to call home to the Bronx twice during his tour. His younger sister Maria, who was 16 at the time, remembered both calls vividly when I talked to her. The first time he called, we all crowded around the phone in the kitchen. Mom, Dad, me, our little brother. Even the lady from next door came over, because we'd told everyone Tony might call. and when we heard his voice, Mom just started crying. She was so happy. He sounded so good, upbeat, making jokes, asking about the neighborhood, about whether his friend Luis had asked out that girl yet, about whether I'd made the cheerleading squad. Just normal Tony stuff. We talked for maybe 7 minutes. When we hung up, Mom said it was the best day she'd had in months. She made his favorite dinner that night, even though he wasn't there to eat it, just because she was so happy. Maria paused for a long time when she was telling me this. We were sitting in her living room in Florida. She was 62 years old. Her brother had been dead for 47 years. The second call came about 2 months later. She finally continued. Same thing, we all gathered around, so excited. And again, he sounded fine. Great, even. Told us he'd be home in 4 months. Told Mom he was dreaming about her pastels. Told Dad to take care of his car for him. But this time, when we hung up, I caught Mom crying in her bedroom later. Not happy, crying like the first time. I asked her what was wrong. She said, "He sounds too good, Mija. Nobody over there should sound that good." She knew. Mothers always know. Tony Rodriguez was killed 3 weeks after that second phone call. The letter from his commanding officer said he died instantly, didn't suffer, was a hero. The standard letter they sent to all the families. But Tony's best friend, who was with him when it happened, told the family years later at a reunion that Tony had actually lived for about 20 minutes after he was hit, long enough to know he wasn't going to make it, long enough to say, "Don't tell my mother it hurt. Tell her it was quick." Even in dying, these boys were trying to edit the truth to make it easier for the people who loved them. World War I gave us, perhaps, the most famous example of this protective lying, though most people don't know the real story. You've probably heard about the Christmas Truce of 1914, when British and German soldiers stopped fighting, came out of their trenches, and supposedly played soccer together in no man's land. It's become this beautiful story about the humanity that can exist even in war. But what most of the soldiers didn't tell their families was what happened the day after Christmas. The officers on both sides ordered them back to killing each other. Men who had shared cigarettes and shown each other pictures of their children on Christmas Day were ordered to shoot each other on December 26th. And they did, because they were soldiers and those were orders. British Private Frederick Heath wrote home about the Christmas truce. His letter is quite famous now, actually. It's been reprinted in history books. He described the singing, the gift exchanging, how strange and wonderful it was to see the Germans up close as human beings rather than as targets. He wrote, "It was like the war stopped for one day, and we all remembered we were just men, far from home, wanting the same things." What he didn't write home was what he put in his diary on December 26th. Back to it today. Killed a German boy this morning. Might have been one of the ones I talked to yesterday. Can't think about it. Can't let myself think about it, or I'll go mad. The Civil War letters are full of these same kinds of strategic omissions, but they also show us something else. Something about how the nature of what you can't say changes depending on which side you're on and what you're fighting for. I have letters from both Union and Confederate soldiers in my collection. The Union boys writing home to farms in Massachusetts or Iowa could talk pretty freely about why they were fighting. Preserving the Union, ending slavery, these were things they could say out loud in letters that their whole community might end up reading. But the Confederate letters are different. Yes, many of them talk about states' rights and defending their homes, but you can also sense this hesitation, this awareness that maybe their cause isn't quite as righteous as they need it to be. And so they focus on other things in their letters home. The brotherhood of their fellow soldiers, the bravery of their regiment, how much they miss home cooking. They talk around the uncomfortable center of what they're actually fighting for. And boys on both sides couldn't talk about the simple truth that sometimes you weren't fighting for any grand cause at all. Sometimes you were just fighting because the man next to you was fighting and you couldn't let him down. Sometimes you were fighting because you were too scared to do anything else. Sometimes you killed because killing was what would keep you alive another day. These truths didn't fit into the patriotic letters either side expected, so they went unsaid. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Martinez was one of the first women to serve in direct combat roles in Iraq. She wrote letters home to her grandmother in Texas every week without fail. Her grandmother had raised her after Jennifer's parents died in a car accident when Jennifer was 7. They were incredibly close. Jennifer's letters were full of details about the landscape, about the heat, about missing Tex-Mex food, about the translator she worked with who taught her Arabic phrases. Typical soldier stuff, things that would make her grandmother smile and feel connected to her granddaughter's experience. What Jennifer couldn't write about, what she didn't think her 82-year-old grandmother could handle, was what it felt like to be a woman in combat. The extra scrutiny, the need to prove herself twice as hard as the men, the sexual harassment that was just considered part of the experience, the time she'd saved 3 men's lives in a firefight, and one of them still couldn't look her in the eye afterward because she'd had to drag him to safety and he couldn't handle having been rescued by a woman. She couldn't write about the Iraqi women and children she'd seen, the ones who reminded her so much of herself and her grandmother, caught in circumstances they didn't create and couldn't escape. She couldn't write about the moral complexity of everything, about how nothing was as clear as it had seemed back in basic training. Jennifer did what soldiers have always done. She kept a journal. She wrote the truth there, late at night by flashlight, filling page after page. She wrote about her anger, her fear, her confusion, her occasional moments of dark humor, her grief, her questions about whether any of this mattered or meant anything. She came home in 2007. Her grandmother died in 2009, never knowing what Jennifer's war had really been like. Jennifer still has all her grandmother's letters to her, and all the letters she sent her grandmother, and she has her journals. She's never let anyone read them. When I asked her why she shared this story with me, but wouldn't share the journals themselves, she said, "Some lies need to stay in place, even after everyone involved is gone." My grandmother died believing I had a hard but meaningful experience serving my country. That belief brought her comfort. Why would I take that away from her now? The truth is mine to carry. It's what I signed up for. That might be the most profound thing anyone said to me in all my years of collecting these letters. The truth is mine to carry. It's what I signed up for. These soldiers, from every American war, made a choice. They chose to carry the full weight of the truth themselves rather than share that burden with the people they loved. They chose to let their families sleep at night. They chose to preserve, as much as possible, the innocence and peace of the home they were fighting to protect or return to. And it cost them. Oh, how it cost them. My grandfather, the one whose letters I found in my grandmother's attic, lived to be 87 years old. He had a good life, by most measures. Came home, used the GI Bill to go to college, became a teacher, married my grandmother, raised 3 kids, had grandkids, retired to Florida, played golf twice a week. From the outside, you'd say he adjusted well, that he was one of the lucky ones who came home and built a normal life. But my uncle told me that his father never slept more than 4 hours at a stretch, that he couldn't go to action movies, that certain smells, like diesel fuel or mud after rain, would make him go very quiet and still, that he never, ever talked about the war except in the most general terms, and only when directly asked, which the family learned not to do because it clearly pained him. The cost of protecting his family from the truth was that he had to live with it alone for over 50 years. He had to carry all of it, by himself, until the day he died. And according to my uncle, Near the very end, when the morphine made him confused, he would sometimes call out names. Names of men who'd been dead for half a century. He was back there. In the war he'd never really left. That's what these letters represent. Not just historical documents. Not just interesting examples of wartime correspondence. They represent a choice that hundreds of thousands of young Americans have made across generations. The choice to lie to the people they love. The choice to carry unbearable truths alone rather than burden others with them. The choice to protect home by keeping home innocent of what war really means. And the people back home made their own choice too. To accept the lies, to read between the lines without pushing for more, to honor the bargain their soldiers were offering them, to carry their own burden of not knowing, of helpless worry, of understanding more than was being said, but respecting the distance their loved ones needed to maintain. These letters, both the ones that were sent and the ones that weren't, are love letters in the truest sense. They're written by people trying desperately to protect each other across impossible distances, under impossible circumstances. The lies they contain are acts of love. The truths they conceal are carried as acts of love. And the unsent letters, the journals, the words that were written but never shared, those might be the greatest acts of love of all, because they prove that even when you're in hell, even when you're terrified and traumatized and transformed by horror, you still have the capacity to think of someone else first, to put their peace above your own need to confess, to unburden, to be fully known. I think about this a lot now when I hear people thank soldiers for their service. And yes, we should thank them for the obvious service, for the risk and sacrifice and courage. But maybe we should also thank them for this other service, this quieter one, for the truths they carried alone so we wouldn't have to carry them, for the nightmares they had so we could sleep peacefully, for the innocence they sacrificed to preserve ours. My grandfather's unsent letter, the true one from Okinawa, ends like this. I'm not the man you married anymore, sweetheart. I wish I was, but I'm not. War changes you in ways that can't be unchanged. But I'll come home, and I'll try my best to be a good husband to you anyway. I'll try to be the man you remember, even if I have to pretend. And I'll never tell you what I've seen or what I've done, because you deserve to live in a world where these things don't exist. That's what I'm fighting for, really. Not for any of the big reasons they talk about. I'm fighting for your right to never have to know what fighting is really like. I love you. I'll always love you. And I'll keep these truths from you, because that's what love means to me now. He folded that letter, put it in his sea bag, and wrote a different one to send home. One that said he was fine, that the food wasn't too bad, that he missed her cooking, that he'd be home before she knew it. One that would let her sleep that night. And that's what I think about whenever I hold these old letters in my hands. These aren't just pieces of paper and ink. They're evidence of the deepest kind of love humans are capable of. The kind that says, I will carry this darkness so you don't have to. I will lie to you to protect you. I will face the truth alone so you can live in peace. The letters came home, but the whole truth, the full truth, often never did. It stayed there in those distant places, or it came home locked inside the soldiers themselves, carried in silence until the day they died. That's the story the letters tell, both the ones that were mailed and the ones that weren't. That's what I've learned from reading thousands of them over these past few years. War doesn't just kill people. It creates these terrible gaps between what happened and what can be said about what happened. And into those gaps, soldiers pour their love for home, their desire to protect, their need to preserve something clean and untouched by the horror they're living through. These letters are bridges built across impossible distances. They connect the war zone to home, but only by carefully obscuring most of what the war zone really contains. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that was necessary. Maybe it still is. Because at the end of the day, what these soldiers were really saying in all their carefully edited letters in all their cheerful lies, in all their strategic omissions, was simply this: I love you enough to bear this alone. I love you enough to let you think I'm fine when I'm not. I love you enough to come home and pretend to be the person I was before, even though that person doesn't exist anymore. That's what the letters home really say. Every single one of them. Across every American war. Through every generation of soldiers who've made this same impossible choice. I love you. That's why I'm lying to you. I love you. That's why I'll never tell you the full truth. I love you. That's why I'll carry this weight alone until the day I die. And somehow, that makes the lies true after all.